So the very first thing that we're gonna do today is we're gonna load our brush with water. We're going to go over and paint mostly turquoise for our underpainting for the background, because we want to fill in all the space before we start. So the easy way to do that, and I'm going to show you step by step, but the very first thing is on your palette, you're going to put, this will be almost like a wash, but a little bit heavier, because we want it to be completely covered as far as the canvas goes, but it doesn't have to be really heavy in the sense like that's all that we're going to do, since we are going to put the palette knife. But we are going to add different colors as we go in, but because we have a drawing already established on the painting, it's real easy if we put a light coat of paint so that we can keep our drawing if you need to identify where things are going. And so I'll show you a real easy way that you'll be able to do that. This is the amount of turquoise paint that you're going to use, and we're going to add other colors to it, just because as we paint, we want this to be just as important as the palette knife painting. So first of all, you need turquoise green, and then you can add white, and I added that to the palette next, and then I'm going to add a little bit of the yellow ochre. And the yellow ochre is the one that looks yellow with brown in it. It's the golden color. And then I'm going to add the yellow green. So with those colors on my palette, then I have enough that I can start my underpainting with my brush. So what I'd like for you to do first is dip your brush in the water, and that's the big brush, and just dip it in, and then you can just tap it dry on your paper towel so that we won't have like a watercolor wash, but we'll definitely have a flow that we can get with our brush. So you have your inspiration piece that you can look at and see where we're going with our colors. But basically for our underpainting, we're going to take and we're going to use, we're just going to get a little bit of turquoise. We're going to get a little bit of the yellow ochre. And then we're going to start in the space that's at the bottom. And we're just going to spread that out using a horizontal brush stroke that just really covers the canvas. Now, at this point, you can decide how much coverage you want to give it. For instance, I loaded my brush again with the yellow green, and see in this space how I'm beginning now to add another color by itself, just that I picked up. So I didn't mix the two colors together. I just picked up a little bit of the yellow green by itself and spread that along the bottom as we begin to create our water space. Now I'm going to go back and I'm just going to load my brush just with the turquoise green, and you'll notice that all the space that's underneath the boat is very dark. So I'm just going to go right in that space and go ahead and put that. I'm really making myself like a map of where I'm going.
What color was that?
The turquoise
The
green.
turquoise.
It's still turquoise. I'm just going right along that space and putting that in. I'm not paying much attention to detail. I'm using a big wide brush and I'm just laying in the color. But I'm doing it in such a way that I feel like I'm painting. I'm not just covering the canvas. I'm making it interesting in case there are places that I just want to leave and I don't need any palette knife strokes on. So I'm picking up a little bit more of the green. This is the yellow green, and I'm just laying it across. All of these right now are just horizontal lines. The palette knife is going to give us an opportunity to do other directions. added the white and the cerulean, and I'm just brushing across. This time I'm using the toe of the brush. And what is so important is that as you add these colors in, on this end you're adding the yellow green now to the cerulean blue. I just continued back where I was on the other side, but I'm using the toe of the brush to go around the edge. And so when I need to, I can lay down my brush flat to fill in. And each time I go over, I'm just picking up the colors that I have on my palette as I want to. On this side, I'm going darker than I did on this side. This was our light side. I'm letting this side be darker, but I'm just adding more of the turquoise green on this side. Remember, you can turn your brush sideways and get thin brush strokes of different colors. Now look how magical that is once you add those colors on top of each other. You get the feel of water already just shimmering in that space just by letting those colors overlap each other while they're wet. Now I'm back where I started from, and I have a pretty good sense of what I want to do when I get and add the palette knife to give me texture. But as I feel the need, or if I want to add more paint, remember we started with just a thin coat of paint, I can always add more just for my composition if I need to. Remember, your brush needs to flow, so it's always a good idea to dip your brush in water after you've been painting for a few minutes. When you dip it in the water, if you will go over and literally mix the water and the paint together, then you'll have paint that you can paint with, and it flows right across the canvas. Once again, these are the wide strokes, but you can certainly turn the brush and add strokes that are thinner. And layer in just as many colors as you want to be creative and to have your painting look just like you want it to. On up above and go all the way to the top of the canvas. I'm going to add, without washing my brush out at all, I'm just adding some white to my canvas, and I'm going to have the colors that I've been using on my brush. I just picked up some white, but now I'm using that to continue coloring in this space that's on the left side of the tree. So I just picked up some white, and everything else that was on my brush, I'm really just pulling it right over the canvas. If I get to a place that I need to go around a limb, I just turn my brush on its side and put my edges in. Now we're going to be creating leaves in all of this tree space, so I would like to change my brush strokes to something that's short and not straight across. This was important to make the feel of the water being basically still or not moving. That's very different than we want for the leaves. We want those to feel very full and dense. So as I begin to add more colors like the white and the blue and the yellow green, I'm changing my brush stroke. And you'll be doing the same kind of thing when you pick up the palette knife. You'll be changing the direction of how you use it. So right now, just to get our underpainting in. And we're gonna have so many colors that we put on the leaf. Basically, we're just doing a light blue color in here. Now I'm gonna add a little turquoise to my brush. That's the darker color, but remember I still have yellow green on my brush. So I'm just moving across the canvas, adding colors as I want to. As I paint with the yellow ochre and the white, I'm filling in most of this space. I'm overpainting the branches just enough so that I won't have any open canvas showing. Pressure levels are something that is very important to an artist with a brush or a knife or any tool that they use. And the more you paint, I think the more you'll figure that out. Sometimes as you pat with the brush, you get a very solid approach that's full body with the width. But if you wanted to create something different, it's easy to start and press down and then to fan out, push down and then let go and fan out. That creates something very different. I'm adding more turquoise now into the painting. I'm also adding white to the turquoise. That lightens it up some, but it also keeps it from being bright. Adding white actually dulls the color. We're going to have a lot of bright colors, as you see in the inspiration piece, so we don't have to stay too bright now, because we want the bright colors when we put those on with a palette knife to really stand out. As I begin to overlap, getting down to my horizon line or the area where my boat is, I'm just overlapping, and I'm not having a specific line that shows, oh, this is my horizon line. In between my boat and my horizon line, and I'm actually, while that paint is wet, I'm going to use the toe of my brush with white paint on it to come right across this way and give some reflective light strokes in that area. And I did it now because the paint's wet and it's really fun to slide across it. With this cerulean blue that I had on my brush, I'm going to add the yellow, green, and white, and I'm going to continue on in between my branches. almost made it. Adding more turquoise in this area and cerulean blue, the darker color. So now I have the turquoise, the dark green, and the blue, and I'm using those. Remember, you need to dip your brush in the water and then put the wet brush in the paint and mix it up so it will flow. You need to do that while you're painting. If your brush starts dragging and it doesn't flow, then that's a real good sign that it's telling you that it needs some water. But I'm just alternating when I pick up the cerulean blue and the turquoise green. As I get to the horizon line area, I'm going to overlap over the line that I put in earlier. And then I'm going to use the yellow, green, and the white to come in and do some little reflective light coming in with the yellow, green, and the white. And I'm just turning my brush, using the toe of it, and streaking a little bit.
Where are you?
Right here. Across the horizon area. Then with that color, the yellow green, going right up to the top and finish that space. I'm putting water again on my brush so that it can be fluid enough so it can cover up this corner. I can still see where my tree limbs are, so I'm not worried about covering up that space. Just made a light little coverage area so that I can go right around it. So we're going to add a couple more colors to our palette. You have a burnt sienna, which is a light brown. And then you have a burnt umber, which is a dark brown. And you already have enough of the other colors that we will be able to make the browns darker or lighter or greener or golden, make it more golden. So those will be colors that we use right in with the other colors that we have on our palette. So I'm just gonna pick up, if you'll notice where the light's coming from in the back, that these trees are pretty dark in the front area. So I'm just gonna start by picking up the burnt umber, and I'm gonna add it right into the dark turquoise green that I have. This is the burnt umber, and I'm gonna add it right into the turquoise. Now, to help me get started and to make sure that I have control over my lines, I'm just going to use the side of the brush and draw a line if I want a line. Now, some people are more abstract in their painting and they don't have to have lines. So if you don't need specific lines, then you don't have to. But this is just a real good way to make a line that gives you an edge. Now, what I mean by not having a line or an edge, if you paint more in an abstract form and you want these colors just to not have a specific line, then you can just do it a little freer like this and create it in a way that you don't have to have one continuous line, like if you were doing, this, where you were just going down and that is my tree line. So you can be a little looser with the drawing if you want to, but if you want a tight line, it's fine, just draw the line. And then where the brush is wider, you can turn it sideways and get the larger spaces filled up quicker. And then as you move up your space, we're gonna begin adding the lighter color brown. That's the burnt sienna. It's lighter, so we're gonna pick that up, and I'm just blending it in with what I've already painted and what I already have on my brush. I'm just using the line and the pressure of my brush to make sure the pressure is very, very light here, so I can control it. And it's very heavy here because it's thicker. So if I don't need a thick line, then I make sure with the pressure it's very, very light, so I can make sure that I'm just touching exactly where I want to go. But I'm definitely making sure that I'm going from fat to skinny as I move upward. And I think it's important that you paint the way the tree grows. I'm gonna add water to my brush, and as I do that, I'm coming to my palette and I'm flattening out my brush. That's another thing that's important, using your palette. Push your brush into the palette and flatten it out. And with the water and the flattening of the brush, I have a very thin edge that I can get a lot of control with my brush. I can draw zigzag, wavy, curvy. I can just draw with it, but lay in the lines the way I want them to go. But I can do that with a thick 1-inch wide brush, but it's just the way you hold the brush. It's the pressure you put on the brush. It's the amount of paint you have on the brush. So there are a lot of factors. But the more you experiment, the more you're gonna find just the right pressure for you so that you can make it thinner and thinner. I'm going lighter as I go out to the edge too. I can add the yellow ochre in to make it lighter as I go out this way. So if you just pick up some of the yellow ochre, still haven't washed the brush, just added different colors of paint. I've added water, and you continually need to do that if you're painting with acrylic so that the brush will flow. If not, it's like really just painting with sandpaper across your brush, and you really can wear the brushes out very quickly by not having them flow across the canvas. This is just like rubbing across sandpaper. Okay, so one brush stroke, and we're going to start another tree trunk on the left hand side. Sort of put in my lines where I want my edge to be, and then I can just work quickly to fill in the middle section. I am working from the bottom of the tree up. I'm using that toe of the brush to make my thin lines. I'm adding burnt sienna as I move upward to make it lighter. And then I'm adding yellow ochre. And then we're just going to have a little bit of the brush work left before we start experimenting with the palette knife. Remember, this is the planning stage for your painting. You're planning colors and shapes and lines. You can plan some texture with your brush, but because we're using the palette knife, we'll do most of the raised texture with the palette knife. And today we're actually going to add medium. We'll be adding a gel medium into our acrylic paint. And we'll also be adding a medium that's a paste that's thicker. So you can get as thick as you want to with those two mediums added to the acrylic. Okay, basically the big brush has done its job today, so I'm just going to use a paper towel to get most of the paint out of the brush before I put it in the water container. I'm going to wipe out the extra paint, and then I'm going to put the brush in my brush tank. I'm going to agitate it across the bottom of the cup to get most of the pigment to fall down to the bottom. Then I can dry my brush and put it aside. And I'm going to get I'm going to use a smaller brush to paint my boat with. Okay, so next we're going to use a round brush and go in and just paint the detail on our boat. And we're going to paint a white boat, but we're going to do the inside first and make it darker on the inside, and then we'll set up the outside shape. So I'm going to add the turquoise green. If you'll dip your brush in your water first, remember, and then go over and get the turquoise green and the dark brown. That's the burnt umber. Mix those together. You'll have a really dark color that we're going to put inside our boat. Now our boat has, when you look at it, you can tell that it has a place for the inside part of the boat that shows, and then this is the top part of the boat. So the actual part that you see drawn in this section right here, and if you'll look at your inspiration piece, you can see there is a opening that's very dark that you can just, if your brush is dipped in water and then you roll it in the paint, you can get right inside and just fill in that space. And you've got two of them to do that show the inside part of the boat, but brown with a little turquoise in it makes it really dark. So that sets up the form of the boat so that you can start getting the idea that it's, you know, three-dimensional. This is the inside. Then everything else is going to be a good bit lighter. So I'm going to wipe off my extra paint and wash my brush, and then I'm going to load my brush with white. And I want to add a little bit of the yellow ochre. And I've still got some of the green and brown showing through in my brush because I just rinsed it out a little bit, and that's good because I want this part in the back area to be darker than the part in the front. So it's white, it has yellow ochre in it. But it also has a little smidgen of the blue and brown color that I had on the brush originally. In the back of the boat, with white, yellow ochre. But now I'm going into it and actually giving it the form that it needs to look like it is the back of the boat. And you need one vertical line that goes in between the shape that you just painted, because you want this part to be the back of the boat and this part to be the side of the boat. So in essence, you're building yourself a little triangle shape in the first shape that you made. And so I just created myself a gray. I made gray. I mixed white, yellow ochre, and then the combination of the burnt umber and the turquoise. So that gray color allowed me to be able to paint this shadow that's back on the back of the boat. We also need that same shadow color coming back here across the rim or the edge of the boat that comes all the way across. So remember, you have to dip your brush in water and then roll it in your paint to get a point on the end of your brush, and that way you can just come in and go across. Remember the pressure? You need to choke up on your brush. You need to get a little line so that you can control where the line is going to go to the back of the boat to make the edge. Now remember, we're gonna put texture on everything when we get to the palette knife. So if you feel like that you don't want to worry about too much detail in there with the little brush, don't worry about it. We can make it with a knife. Palette knives are really fun to get nice little lines with. Now we're going to lighten up that, just keep the gray color that you have on your brush, but add white to it so it gets lighter. And then you can paint the front of your boat with that triangle shape. Just extend the point of the brush out to the tip. Remember, roll that paint brush in your paint and form a point on the end of your brush before you try to paint a point. But it'll just flow right across the top of it, and that's a grayish color. And then we're going to add more yellow ochre to it and paint the front of the boat, but it'll have more yellow in it on the front. You can paint your boat any color you want. I'm just giving you a suggestion about the colors and showing you how to lay on the paint. Once you get this underpainting done, when you get ready to go and venture out with a palette knife, you could certainly change it. But this is white with yellow ochre. And I'm using the little tip of the brush when I need to go and paint a thinner line. And then when I'm painting a fat space in the middle, I just flatten out the brush by using pressure to push the paint where I want it to go. And now that I have most of that yellow, the golden yellow color, I'm going to add more white to my brush, and I'm going to come across and paint the lines that sort of hold the boat together on the back and in the middle. And now basically I have all my canvas covered. So after you've painted a little bit of the detail in, if you will wipe your brush and then clean it out again, and then put that aside. We'll talk a little bit about a palette knife and how we can pull that together with your painting. I would suggest that you keep your palette like this because we can pull the colors, but I'm going to give you a blank palette that you can use to do the work with your palette knife. And so right beside the paint, you're going to have another palette that you can actually mix and spread your palette knife out so that you can have freedom. We want you to have wrist movement because that's the whole technique that we're going to figure out about how the palette knife can move across your painting. To begin with, where our water, you can see everything that's up here will be reflected down in the water. We will add texture to the trees. We will add texture to the boat. We will make lines. The different angles that you use with a palette knife, depending on what size you have, basically is a 45-degree angle that makes the knife easy for you to control and easy for you to pick up paint or load the paint and then push the paint out onto the canvas. Because we've done our underpainting, it'll be easy for us to use the knife and use the tips and the corners to make exact edges when we need to. And we'll use those to highlight or to create textures in the boat. If we want to have wood textures, we can do that. If we want to have water texture, we can do that. We can have bark texture, and then we can create all the leaves in the trees with different ways that we hold our knife and how we push it onto the canvas. We can dot, we can drag, we can rotate the knife in a way that we can make even swivels in the sense of really showing motion in the painting too. So a gesture is a real good word to think of in the sense of being free with the knife, and gesture lines could easily be done where you felt like that you were free enough to actually just draw. And so if you wanted to add more limbs, we could easily take, I'm just going to use the dark brown and the black to show you how we could just easily come through and make more branches if we needed to do that. We're actually just using the line of your brush on the very corner. We still have that idea of the 45, except that you don't go over quite as much. The 45 is more of a tilt, and this is less than that, so that you could get just the thinnest little line possible. You know, the 45, you get more paint actually put on the canvas. So now you just get to play with lines of texture. You started off with a dark brown, and you added the lighter brown, and then now you're adding the yellow ochre, and you just, because you're building all the layers of color, they can blend as you begin to add color on top of color. And there you have the bark on the tree. This is a good time to take the crimson color and the yellow Mix that together. That'll be a nice orangey color. And you can add that to your tree trunk and really liven up the color. Just with bolts of strokes. Sometimes it's more red, sometimes it's more yellow, sometimes it's a mixture of all of them. Okay, so let's wipe that palette knife off just a second and go over and get the different palette knife. This is the New Age knife that is really thin and fine so that we can develop some of these lines out here if we want to. And you can do it with, I'm going to use a combination of the dark browns, the medium browns, and the golden browns. And I'm just going to pick up just enough on the edge of it that it's not globby, because if you want a line, then you can't put a glob of paint on the palette knife. You can only put enough that if you released it, that it will only make the edge that you want it to make. Now, in this particular case, you can't see it if I make a repeat on the same mark, so I'm just gonna add a new one. So see how you can come in and just make a real thin line and make your limb. So you don't have to make it fat, but you do have to have the tool that will make it a little bit smaller for you. So if you want smaller and smaller, just change your tool and get one that won't hold as much paint. The more paint you have on here, the fatter your line's gonna be when you go to paint. And if any pressure to it will make it thicker. So if you don't want it to be thicker, then you can't press down. So you just have to load paint. But the part about this picture is, in a few minutes, we're gonna start covering up leaves. And if you have any places that you feel like got too thick, then we can put the background back over it, and then we can add more leaves over it. So for instance, if I don't want this mark, I can go back to the original colors that are in my background, and I can play around with that. So I can use the green. Say I don't want that, I can use my green and my white, or my blue and my white, and then I can just make it disappear, because it's going to go right into the rest of my painting in just a minute as I paint. Okay, so let's use this knife over here on the boat just a minute. Let's go in and form the contour that the boat needs, and then we'll be ready for leaves. What we want to do is we want to come in and get the gray color. So remember to make gray, you can, let's use the turquoise and the burnt umber, and then add the yellow ochre to it and white. And then we'll have a grayish color. So once we get a grayish brown, we can go in and we're going to make the edge of the boat on the back of it right here darker. So I'm going to take this tool, this palette knife, and I'm going to use it and just make this line. I'm just literally drawing a line by just tapping the tip. If I want a real skinny line, I can tap the tip and I don't have to use anything except the tip if I want to get that line. Now this is going to make the boat look round, and after I make the line, watch what I'm going to do. See how I'm going to pull my paint out? All I did was lay down my palette knife. I'm going in and using the tip instead of using the whole palette knife at one time. And look how easy I round out my boat doing that. We're going to practice on the front end. Going to do the same thing. I'm going to take the tip of, I'm going to load it up with paint, but just enough it covers the tip of my knife. I'm going to push the tip into the corner of the front of the boat so I have a shape that's pointed. I have a line that's pointed right there at the corner. And I'm just going to come down, tap, 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 just using the tip of this palette knife. And as soon as I have my line, then I'm going to take it and I'm gonna pull the paint out from the line into the center of the boat. And now it's looking round because I have darks on both sides. And then with the grays and or the yellows in the middle, I can make the boat look old or new or whatever color I want it to be. And literally, because it's already painted the color I want, I don't really have to do anything else to it. I'm gonna pick up a little bit of the white and I'm gonna lay the little skinny knife right on top of the bars that go across the supports for the boat. And with the white, I'm just gonna make that a little bit lighter. Tap, 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 tap. I'm gonna use a little bit of that little line to come right across the front of the boat. Just a little, right across the front. This is white, it has a little grayish tone to it. Just tapping. But remember, it's the underpainting is done. So this is just to top off, to accent if I want to. See how I'm just laying the knife down? I just put it in one corner and I left the rest of it showing just the way it was. Palette knives can be just a part of the painting, or you can paint it all with it, but you don't have to paint every inch with the palette knife. Okay, I'm coming right across the back. This is with the gold color with a little white in it, a little gray in it. And I'm just laying the color right on top. In a few places, I'm not going all the way across to make a line. I'm just barely touching it every once in a while to give it some color. I'm gonna break up the inside where the dark is with a little gray. I'm making it a little bit darker, and watch. I'm just gonna take, and I'm gonna go inside and put a mark, and that's it. Yellow and alizarin red and make sort of an orangey color, and let it look like the back of the boat is being sort of hit with a little bit of light coming in. So I just am gonna barely touch the back with a little light, just barely touch, just so it has some color to it. And when you look at the painting, there's so much color. I'd like for you to look at the boat, so I just added a little color. To work with the leaves, we're going to change and use the first palette knife that we use, not the skinny one, and then we can make leaves with this. And we're going to definitely use some bright, beautiful colors, but we want them to be integrated with the rest of the painting. So we're going to use yellow green to begin with, and then we can go back and see, once we get all the leaf colors in there, we can see what else we need to add to the reflection up underneath. I'm going to start with yellow green, and this is where we're going to add the gel to your paint. So if you'll open up your little cup that says gel, and I want you to take a scoop of gel that's the same size scoop as your paint. So I'm going to put 1 gel scoop and 1 paint scoop. And then I'm going to mix that together. And now I have twice as much paint, and it is fluffier. And that's what we're going to use to make our leaves with. So it's half gel and half paint. And the way that we're going to make our leaves will be almost like we're making a comma or an apostrophe, so that we're going to lay down the mark, and then we have a big blob on our palette knife. We're gonna lay it down, and then we're gonna scoop almost like we're going in like an apostrophe or half of a C. We're laying it down and we're leaving it globby. So I put one green one. So now I'm gonna put a cluster of green ones. And every time I put a leaf, I'm going to go pick up more paint. And each time, each one of those marks represent a leaf. And I'm going to do these green ones, and then we're going to change over and mix up some more colors. But right now, I'm just going to do some green. Now you can make them as thick as you want or as thin. But right now we're making them pretty gloppy because we want to experiment with the medium. Okay, so I made some green ones. Now, in that same area, I'm going to do the same thing with the turquoise. I don't even have to wipe my palette knife off. I can take my turquoise. I can add the gel. So now I'm going to have turquoise and gel. I'm going to mix that together, and my turquoise is just going to get larger and bigger, make a larger pile. And it can have some of that other yellow green in it. That would be beautiful. Once I get it mixed, I'm going to go over and I'm going to glob those on, just like I was going to make a C or an apostrophe or a leaf. You can put them very close to the ones you just made. You can also overlap the ones that you just made with the yellow green so that they look like they're all together as one unit and they're not individual little leaves. They're clusters or groups of leaves. And that's with the turquoise green. They all don't have to be the same size or the same shape, and they definitely don't have to be the same color, and they do not have to have the same amount of gel. Now I want us to try the paste. So if you'll open up your container of paste, it looks just like the gel, except it is thicker. And this time I want you to mix half of the paste and half of the gel so that you have equal amounts of gel and paste. And see how I just put my color all in it? Makes no difference because that's what I'm going for. But I'm going to mix up half gel and half paste, and then I'm going to put the color that I want. In this case, I'm going to use a bluish green color. It's really a half and half mixture of the yellow, green, and the turquoise, since I had both of those colors on my palette. And now I'm going to paint with those. And I want you to watch and see and feel how much thicker adding the paste is, and how literally it can just stand there by itself. And then you can decide if you like it that thick, or if you don't think you need it that thick, you can make that decision. But as we go across, we're gonna add more colors. And then you can decide how much gel you want or how much paste. I do recommend that you mix, if you're using the paste, that you mix half of the gel with it, because if you use paste by itself, it can crack, and if cracks aren't appealing to you, then I would suggest that you use that recipe of half gel and half paste. It really will make it stand up with a peak, and the peaks are really great if you want that much paint out from your canvas. You can certainly do that. But as you begin to paint the rest of this, you can decide how much of each one you want. I'm going to go back to the gel, and this time I'm going to add a new color. I'm going to add the white to the gel. And yellow green, so that it's lighter than what we were painting with a while ago. Using colors in the same family creates such a wonderful look on your canvas, because it ties the colors together very naturally. So here comes the white with the yellow green and the gel. And once again, I'm following the same curve that I made with the other leaves. And I want to make sure that I go back and I add some of this color in with the color that I previously did on the first tree, because these are two of the same kind of trees. So we want the leaves to be scattered throughout. Okay, so now I have yellow green with white. I'm using the same stroke, the same curve. Now I'm going to add the gel medium to my light blue and white, or white and blue so that you make it light blue. So I can have the blue color in my tree. And remember, I'm making the same repeat of the C or the apostrophe or the curved line, whichever feels more natural for you to make. And I'm putting a cluster together. And then after I get a good many in the same cluster, I'm going to spread it out and go back and add that throughout the other space. gonna move on. We're gonna get thinner and thinner as we go over here, but we need to make sure that we continue the colors. And the color that's going to change everything about this painting will be the pink that we add. I'm going to start with, so now after adding the turquoise green leaves, the yellow green leaves, the light blue green leaves, the light yellow green leaves, we're going to go to the alizarin red. That's the dark red color. And we're going to make about 3 different values of that color. So I'm going to take my alizarin crimson. I'm going to add white to it first, and then I'm going to add the gel. So there's my white and my alizarin. I'm going to mix that together. Once I get the color mix that I want, then I'm going to add the gel to it. Remember, the gel is just a matte gel. This is acrylic medium. I'm going to add about as much gel as I have paint that I've mixed up. Generally, I like to make sure that I have at least half as much paint as I do the medium. I don't like to carry more medium. I like to carry a little bit more of the paint. So once I get this color mixed up, I am going to use medium red, light red, and dark red to finish up my tree leaves with. So I'm going to start with the medium first, and then I'm going to begin putting those leaves hanging from my tree. As they get out further, if your leaves need to get smaller, just make the tip of your brush, make the tip of the knife push out into the canvas instead of using the whole blade of the knife. Just use the corner. Just use the tip. And those can get smaller. Now I like the darker leaves in there, so I'm adding the darker alizarin red right into my paint. And I'm adding those colors in. And then I'm going to add white to lighten it up. Remember, you can have as much gel as you want. You can add the paste to it if you need it to be thicker. I want to start making my leaves fall down into this area more. And as I add some of the white ones, I'm going to continue adding the blues and the greens until I have it as full as I want it to be. I can go back with my yellow greens. Now, remember, as you're painting, you can add the gel, but you don't have to. You can just use the paint. Just depends on the look that you want. And literally, with the yellow-green leaves coming down in next, you can get the feel of how nice the green blends in with your background. And as you get closer and closer down into your bushy area or your open area that you made earlier, these little marks can become more like dashes where they're further away or smaller. And then your tree will be complete. Now you can just look around, evaluate your picture, see what it needs. I would like to add a little bit more of the turquoise color in the leaves. So I'm going to pick up the turquoise color. I'm going to pick up gel, mix that together. And I'm going to have some turquoise color coming in over here a little bit more. And these leaves, I'm just going to relax the circle part just a little bit so it's not quite so defined. And I'm just going to let them look like they're floating. And of course, if you're making a tree and leaves, anytime you can change the amount of gel or how many leaves you put or the colors that you use. Because it's a very personal statement. And you do need to look at it from a distance to find out how it feels and what it needs. I feel like it needs just a little bit of the darker turquoise underneath the boat, a little line right there. Mine doesn't feel quite dark enough. I'm going to actually mix the alizarin red with my turquoise to make it almost black, and then I'll feel better about that shadow, right, cast shadow right up underneath my boat. Going to put that same dark color right here. Going to do a little bit more playing in here with the colors. And then I think we have a palette knife painting that I'm very proud of.